Hello, everyone. This lecture is an introduction to advanced disability theory. And we're actually going to start by thinking about theory more generally before we move on to think about disability theory specifically. And the reason that we're doing this is that theory is one of those words that we perhaps tend to use without really stopping to think about what it means. So I think it's a good idea to try and get a handle on what we're talking about when we talk about theory. And also, in terms of doing well this year, advanced studies involve you demonstrating conceptual understanding that enables you to use ideas and techniques at the forefront of the discipline. Now, theories are generally or often made up of concepts. Um, so theories are often groups of concepts which are used together to help us explain or make sense of something. So in other words, an understanding of theory is key to developing a conceptual understanding. And also theory is about developing, or partly about developing new ideas and ways of thinking about things. In other words, it is advances in theory that advance the forefront of the discipline, in our case, disability studies. So, getting a good grip on what theory is and being able to use different theories is going to be crucial to doing well this year. Now, the other thing is that theory is something that I think people often find perhaps a little bit intimidating or a little bit boring, and they think it's got to be dry and dull and complicated. And there's no mistake that sometimes it can be, but I want to show you, or try and change your mind and show you that theory is in fact there to help you, right? Theory can help you to think. Um, and think thoughts that you couldn't have thought before. Um, so let's move on then and think about what is theory. Now, there are different kinds of theory and there are different purposes of theory. No doubt it conjures up particular meanings or images or emotional responses in your mind. But there are different kinds of theories that do different things. So we can think about theory as an explanation for something, and so a way to understand the world. We can think about theory as a set of principles or a set of guidelines which can tell us how to act, right? So, for instance, when you're preparing for your driving test, you have to take the theory test, which is about showing that you know the principles of the highway code and therefore how to behave on the road. And similarly, say, theories of pedagogy, theories of teaching, rather than helping to understand aspects of the world, are there to help teachers know how to teach, right, and justify how they teach. So we might think about theories as explanations, or we might think of them as sets of ideas that can help us determine how to act. What these things have in common is that they are tools for thinking, right? So at bottom, right, all theories are tools for thinking. So that's how I would like you to think about theory, right? So theories are there to help you think about stuff and perhaps um, think about things in new ways or arrive at understandings of things that you couldn't have arrived at without that theory. And I like this quote here from the philosopher Bo Dalbon, cited in Daniel Dennett's book, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. So the quote is, "You can't do much carpentry with your bare hands, and you can't do much thinking with your bare brain. And there's an image there of a very plain kind of flat pack type self-assembly cupboard, right? Which you could put together without any tools, maybe just a screwdriver would be the only tool that you would need, and you could put that very crude bit of carpentry together. The next image is this very elaborate, ornate French antique cupboard, black and gold and very beautiful and well crafted. And that is there as a metaphor for the kind of thinking that you might be able to do if you've got the right tools at your disposal and are able to use them. It's very hard to create anything without any tools, right? You might be able to assemble a simple cabinet like the one we saw before without any tools, but with the right tools and plenty of practice using them, you can create, in other words, you can think something much more sophisticated, something you wouldn't have been able to do before. So that's why I want you to try and get to grips with theory and using theory to help you think. Now, so far on your course, you've used some theory, right, but not a great deal. The main bit of theory that you probably think of when you think about disability theory is what we call the social model. In a moment, I'm going to talk about the difference between models and theories. But the social model is probably what you think of when you think about theory. Now, the social model is great, right? It has really helped us to understand a lot about disability and about how disabled people experience the world. But it is also limited, right? You don't want the social model to be the only tool you've got in your thinking toolbox. So that's why this year we'll be asking you to engage with a number of different theories. So, for instance, David Bolt's tripartite model is one that we'll come on to in a few weeks. So what we want to see in your work this year is you moving away from just thinking about the simple social model, medical model binary, right? It's a very useful but also quite crude and simplistic distinction, and we want you to move on to more sophisticated ways of thinking about and talking about disability rather than a situation where everything looks like a nail, everything looks like the medical model or the social model. Okay, now on this next slide we're going to break down these differences between theory, concept and model. So these are words which are sometimes used almost interchangeably as though they're the same thing, but they're not. There's some important differences between them that I think you ought to be confident about. So the first one is theory, right? So a theory is a generalized explanation. It will often draw on a number of concepts. Right, so a theory is, if you like, a fairly large scale, a fairly grand explanation for some kind of phenomena, right? Something that we can observe in the world. Whereas a concept is just a single idea, right? An abstract idea which helps us to make sense of something. So you can have an idea, but that idea isn't necessarily a concept, right? So you can have an idea that you're going to have fish and chips for tea, but that's not a concept, it's just an idea. A concept is an abstract idea which helps us to make sense of something. So for instance, ableism is a concept you'll be working with a lot this year, and it's a concept which helps us to understand why disabled people often face discrimination in the world. And your key text this year, right, Dan Goodley's book, Theorizing Disableism and Ableism, right, is all about putting a whole load of concepts together in order to generate a new concepts and new theory, right, new theories for how to understand disability. And then the final one is model, right? So a model, like the social model or like the medical model, right? A model is a purposeful or simplified version of something that helps us understand that thing. So, for instance, a model car, right, like a little toy car, is a simplified version of a car that helps, say, a child playing with it understand how cars work, right? You drive it forward, it goes somewhere, and if you turn the steering wheel, it changes direction, right? But the model car is obviously much simpler than a real car. And the same with theoretical models. So the social model is a simplified version of the real world that helps us understand how disabled people experience the world. Right? So it helps us understand why those barriers and prejudices and so on exist. So that's the difference between theories, concepts, and models. And now we can move to your key text this year, right? Dan Goodley's book, Dis/Ability Studies. And the subtitle, right? Notice that, Theorizing Disableism and Ableism. So the whole book is theorizing, right? Trying to create new theory, new explanation, new understanding of how disableism and ableism operate. And he also puts forward this new concept, dis/ability, to try and advance our conceptual understanding of disability. But like other disability theories, so like the social model, this new theory, and here I'm going to quote, emanates from the position that disability is a sociological, economic, and cultural thing rather than a psychological, embodied, or medicalized problem. So it's taking, the foundation of the social model, right? That understanding that disability is a social, economic, and cultural thing. It's taking that foundation from the social model and building something new from it, which he's calling dis/ability studies. So that whole book, as I say, is about generating and putting forward a new way of thinking about disability and about ability. But just stepping back from Dan Goodley's book for a moment, right, and thinking about advanced disability theory more generally, just to round things off, theory and disability theory is there to help us come to understand disability. Disability theories are tools for coming to understand disability. They help us think through what disability is in order to understand disability and how it operates and is experienced in the world. So we think using theory. And over the course of this year, what you need to do in order to do well is engage with a range of different theories, a range of different ways of thinking about disability, and use them to demonstrate a more sophisticated understanding of disability than you have done so far with just using the medical model and the social model. Okay, there are a couple of references there if you want to read up on those. Susan Baglieri's Disability Studies in Education, and Daniel Dennett, which I suppose you could use as more of a kind of study skills guide. It's not presenting theories, it's giving you tools for thinking about developing thinking skills, right? Intuition prompts and other tools for thinking. That's all. That's the end. Thank you. Goodbye.